Thank you for clicking on the video. If you want to listen to the full cooldown lap episode 2, go to the link in the description or look up Freaky Fast Broadcasting on YouTube or Spotify. Enjoy the segment of That of the Stars and Stripes with Zach Hall and Kyle McCoy.
All right, welcome everybody. It is the second episode of the Cooldown Lap, the Freaky Fast podcast. This is the Stars and Stripes racing segment, and I got a very special guest with me here tonight, and it's the three-time champion, Kyle McCoy. Man, how's it going today?
Oh, pretty good, man. Pretty good. I always like hearing that three-time in front of my name. It's fun.
It definitely is, man. I know you cherish those 3 championships, and I'm sure we'll get more into those championships here as we get into the segment here tonight. And, first really question I think everybody asks when they go into iRacing, or someone when they want to ask about their iRacing career, is how did you exactly find iRacing? Because I think it's always an interesting story to see how people got into the simulator.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about it, I guess, because it's been a long time. You kind of forget how fast things go. I got into iRacing probably in 2016. At that time, I was in North Carolina. I couldn't tell you how I exactly came across it. I think it was kind of starting to get popular at that point, right? I didn't get on super early, so I don't have like a really cool story for anybody listening. But I kind of jumped in, and when I first jumped in, I just knew I really wanted to race. And I had a laptop and I had a controller. I was a controller Andy to start out, so it was an interesting rookie street stocks to say the least. And after that, I kind of got going. But I couldn't tell you exactly how I found it, other than I think at that point number one, I was in North Carolina, so I was kind of in that racing kind of circle. I worked at a go-kart track. If I had to bet, I'd bet that's where I probably heard first of it. So we'll go with that. We'll say go-kart track.
Yeah, that's really cool, man. That you lived in North Carolina. I also do myself, so I know it's kind of bred into North Carolina, the racing background. So it's always cool to see how people got into it. And then also, you're talking about a controller and a laptop is what you started off with. It's always cool to see what people start with. Like you said, that's what your starter equipment was. What are you currently using, and have you changed any of that over the years you've been racing?
Sure. So yeah, I started with a PS4 controller on a HP laptop. So not only was it an awful setup to start, it wasn't even like technologically up to date back then, right? So I think I had minimum graphics. I had controllers. I remember going around USA and having my thumb worn out from using the left trigger on the or the left analog on the controller. So obviously not racing on that anymore. That was it's not successful in today's world. So after that I bought a G27, Logitech G27, I think in 2017, from some guy who used to play, I think like Forza on it or something, or GTA or something like that for $200, and kind of went from there. And to be honest, I was pretty good with it, and I am still using it today. I actually broke the original one back during last year's Stars and Stripes season, and Derek Offerman, I'll give him a huge shout out. He sent me one for free. I don't know what compelled him to do that, but I appreciated it a ton. So I'm still using a G27. Sitting here with a G27. I've got it HDMI'd up to my little 34-inch TV, and I luckily upgraded my computer about last year, so I'm kind of up to date on that. But I'm not super tech savvy, so I kind of bought it as it is, and that's what we're racing with now. So.
That's really cool, man. I love the tried and true G27. I started off on that myself, and it is exactly what you need for iRacing. I mean, personally, like it's nothing too crazy, but it's exactly what you need to be able to feel and be able to do what you need to do on the track. So, I mean, that is so cool to see that that's what you rock with, because I know there's a lot of guys even in the Pro Series that they went up and got through the direct drive wheels, and some of them even went back to the G27 just because they were so used to that style of a wheel and how well it's performed over all these years. So really
Right.
cool. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean,
it's one of those things that's cool to see, like multiple different people running the same equipment like that and really falling in love with it.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, right? But it gets the job done. And to be honest, like you said, when I broke my original one, I raced on a G29. My friend had lent me for a couple weeks, and I mean I couldn't race with it. I struggled really hard on that wheel, and I think it was more just because I was so used to this setup. So I think it'd be hard to upgrade even at this point, just because I know what I'm getting here. So yeah, yeah, you nailed it.
I have a very similar path myself. My friend is, I started on the G27. Mine broke. I believe something cracked in the centering in it, and it just would not go back to center. And it would slowly, as time went on, it'd be farther to the left as the race went on. And my buddy sent me a G29 because he had an extra one, and I tried to use it, and I just could not get the same feel out of it as the 27. It was similar, but there is still those small differences that the 27 had that just gave you that better feel, in my opinion. So that's cool to hear that you had this similar experience
I
with
was
that.
gonna say you've been down the same path, man. Yeah,
Yep.
that's exactly it. So
It is always cool to see how that works out, man. And it is cool to see all the people's different setups. I mean, you got guys setups out there thousands of dollars, then you got guys setups that are, a couple $100. And I think it's cool to see how they don't, it doesn't represent how your performance level is either. It kind of is one of those things where you can outperform your equipment. I mean, it doesn't matter what you got, you can go out there and still get things done. I mean, clearly with you being a 3-time champion.
yeah. I mean, it's my setup isn't too flashy, but it absolutely gets the job done, and makes it all the more fun sometimes when you can beat some guys on those rich setups. But
That's exactly right, man. Well, those were great, I think, questions to start out with. But I think one of the underlying things is here, you've been with Stars and Stripes now for 6 straight seasons. I mean, you've been a tried and true member, always out there racing and putting, yourself on the line out there. How did you actually come across Stars and Stripes at the beginning? Because, like I said, you've been here since season 1 and actually with the champion of the inaugural season.
oh man, this is a good story. So actually, Nate and I met in a different league. It was the first league I'd ever run. Probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago at this point. And we were some of the faster guys in that league, and it was kind of wasn't run very well. I'll just say it nicely. And so that league kind of folded, and Nate said, would you be interested if I started my own? And at the time you're thinking, well, of course, but also you'd never dream that it would grow into something like this, right? Like that'd be this strong running for 6 seasons. It's crazy to think back on those days. I think we ran one race together in Texas in that other league, and then he said, "Are you game to go?" And I jumped right in. So yeah, it's been so fun ever since then, and yeah, we kind of met from the beginning, so it's been fun to be along for the ride.
That's a great story there, man. It's always seems like that's how it is. Friendships begin, and you kind of get lured into something else, and then boom, you never know you're there for 6 straight seasons. So it's really cool to hear.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's been a long ways, but yeah, couldn't be happier.
Well, over those 6 seasons, how do you feel like the league has changed and grown? Because I know the competition has always gotten stiffer and stiffer. It seems like each season. What is your biggest things you've seen over these past 6 seasons?
Yeah, I mean the racing's just like the leaps and bounds of what it was, and I mean it was still, the way you build a league. I think Nate and Derek and Brian have all done a really good job of putting this together. Is to start out by saying race clean, and then you work up to the threshold, right? You kind of work up to that edge of like, okay, we're racing clean, but we're also racing hard, rather than coming from the other direction, which I think a lot of leagues make the mistake of, is we don't want to have rules, we don't want to have regulations. We just want everybody to have fun and race hard, and then you end up with these crash fests, and people leave. You get a lot of like turnover that way. So I think we started out kind of saying, let's race clean, and then let's work up to racing hard. And as we've done that, I think we've seen a lot of improvement in individual drivers, that's been so fun to watch. Some of the guys that ran well, I mean, at the beginning, but now are really running up front day to day. And obviously, we've had a lot of people come in too, but yeah, kind of that initial underlying factor of let's race clean, and then you get these really good races sometimes that we put on where we don't have very many yellows. But it has built up to this point where now competition's so even that you do have to race hard for spots, and sometimes you have to draw the line in the sand of where you race clean and race hard. But it's growing, and I think the etiquette is still there in this league, which is hard to find sometimes.
It definitely is, man. I always say it's one of the cleanest leagues, but y'all always race hard, like you brought up that, it's not just, let people go by. It's always hard racing. And I mean, y'all have plenty of times over these seasons that we've broadcasted that y'all have gone completely green, and I think that's an awesome thing to have at your league where the race plays out full length and, you have green flag stops, you have strategy, actually playing out when to pick and choose your tires. So I think you hit the nail on the head there, man.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part of that is when you get these guys that come in, either when they're first starting out or just new guys that are subs or joining for a limited amount of time. You'll see, I mean, the racecraft part of this league, it's real, and you have to have it if you want to win. And there's lots of days where, I mean, not only do you have to be good, you basically have to be perfect if you want to win some of these races because the strategy that goes into it. Sometimes you can just get caught off guard on strategy. And a lot of times these guys just aren't racing like they're not racing to have those tires on in 50 laps. You expect a yellow in 10 laps, and you'll see a lot of guys kind of charge hard and then fall off and have to learn a little bit different pace style in this league, which is fun. It's rewarding for us that have been here a while and kind of know what to expect, but also is just interesting to watch because it's a different style of racing, I'd say, than what you find in a lot of the official stuff.
I completely agree there, man. I mean, it's very difficult to get wins in this league, in my opinion. And over those 6 seasons, you've had 23 of them. I mean, that's a ton of wins that you've had so far in the 6 seasons. Do you have like one that sticks out to you as like a favorite memory or something like that? Because I mean, I'm sure it's hard to go back with all the wins you've had, but does one ever really stick out to you?
Man, nobody's asked me that question before, and I haven't realized how hard it is to come up with an answer until right this second. But I think definitely I always like slide back to that Xfinity season, and kind of that playoff run. I don't think I've ever raced as well as I did during that time. I think that car especially is good for me, so I don't know if I could do it again, but I always look back at those wins. Bristol, Homestead, some of those tracks in that stretch, Atlanta, that were just really good to me. And yeah, that's a time where I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I could be at that level again, right? Like, there's not very many times where you're kind of at peak performance and it's hard to sustain. So I look back at those wins and think, man, those were some tough ones to get because the competition was there, but uh, they were also really fun because they were tracks that I knew I was decent at, but had to pull a little extra out.
No doubt. I vividly remember that, man. I think that's even where we'll get into like our next question for you is like, you won 4 of the last 5 races that season. Like, it was amazing to see, and you turned it up. Like, the regular season wasn't the greatest for you. You had a good regular season, but you just, out of nowhere, coming into the playoffs, it just seemed like something clicked, and you were unstoppable at some points. I mean, I think even before the 4 out of 5 wins, you had a second place finish at, like, Talladega. So, I mean, to look at that, I mean, I coined it on the broadcast. I know I said it a lot of times with you. I called it the clutch factor. It seemed like you just had that when it came down to the end of the year type of feeling that you could get it done when it needed to be most. And, 3 championships, so it's proven you've had that, and it's always been like the playoffs have been where you've performed the best. What do you think comes down to that to make it so much into your hands? Because, man, it just seems like when it gets down to playoff times, you're the guy to beat always.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of different factors. Honestly, I wanna take full credit and just say, oh man, I just mental toughness, something like that. And there's an element of that absolutely, that you have to just. I don't want to call it toughness. I want to call it more like even keeled. I think back to Ross Chastain's win at Coda last year, where he said he was trying to kind of not get too high on the highs and too low on the lows, and I don't know that he necessarily does a fantastic job of that all the time. But I think that quality is super important, to understand that these races are not short, and you have to be patient, but also on your game to win them. So I think that's a factor. I think I said a couple weeks on the broadcast the schedule's kind of at the late end of the season. I'm not trying to make any excuses, but I think those tracks sometimes fall in a little more in my wheelhouse too. That always it always helps to go in with a little extra advantage, right? Like, I don't think if we had a ton of short tracks at the end of that season that I would have clicked off the same amount of stats that we did that year. And I think also a little bit more of that goes into the racecraft part of it, right? Because you get these a lot of times we'll have these seasons and you start out with a lot of guys, and as you kind of dwindle down, these guys maybe starting to realize that they don't have that racecraft to race with us on a weekly basis. Whether we always like to develop that in our drivers, but not everybody's going to be that patient to wait to develop that. So we get a little smaller fields, get a little more green racing, and I think that's a little bit more in my wheelhouse. Not necessarily the short 5 lap sprints, but more of a methodical approach to the race. And I think all of those factors together kind of creates that perfect storm there at the end of the year for me.
I completely agree, man. I think you really seem to just put it all together, and like you said, methodical. I think that's one thing you've had over all the seasons is you just methodically know how to work your way through the races and just not put yourself in too many bad situations. You know when to go and when not to go, pretty much. So it is something that I've took a lot of learning from even myself, just watching you out there race and commentating it with Sam and having Robert up there producing. We've always seen that from you, so man, it's always been a pleasure to see that, and we know when it comes to down the playoff time, you've been a huge factor as always. So I'm sure at some point if you can get back full time, you'll be able to put that pressure back on during playoff time.
Yeah, I'm hoping during this summer, we'll kind of next season we'll be able to get back to full-time racing and hopefully give these guys another run for this stuff. Yeah, it's been a little crazy the last 6 months, but that's okay. That's part of life, right? So, yeah, I you always hear these like cup drivers talk about that kind of patience, like being there at the end of races, being smart, being safe, and you don't necessarily associate that with racing a lot of times. So it's interesting to I think it's fun for the everyday person to be able to get on iRacing and kind of feel some of those things that they're feeling too. So it's that whole thing is cool.
That it definitely is, man. Well, like you said, no longer full time racing at the moment. Hopefully, like you said, coming up next season, you'll be able to get back to full time racing. Do you feel like there's kind of less pressure now that you're going out there and racing, not really worrying about any type of championships? It's just kind of go out there racing each race as its own and, trying to go out there getting wins.
Yeah, it's a bit of a change of pace, and I've enjoyed it so far this year. I kind of knew right away that I was not going to be able to make all the races, and it was going to be tough to keep myself in the playoff hunt. So it's changed my approach a little bit. Um, and to be probably not for the better if we're being honest, because the whole what we just talked about in the last 10 minutes probably flies out the window at that point, right? Like, thinking back to this last week in Nashville, I just kind of I knew the track wasn't my best. I kind of just went hard and tried to put myself up front, and of course, I ended up in a wreck. So it's gonna be interesting to balance that. But I think over the next 4 or 5 weeks, it's gonna be fun because there's some good tracks up on the schedule, and yeah, it's fun to just go and race, right? Like that's all. That's why we're all on here in the first place, So I'm hoping to click off a couple more. It should be a fun stretch of the season and keep myself out of the melee once the playoffs hit. So.
Heck yeah, man! I tell you, yeah, it's always fun to watch you guys do battle, and now that you've not been full time racing, I can see that. Yeah, you're going a little bit harder for those races, especially. I mean, you got nothing on the line. I mean, you gotta go out there and try it, and even looking back to season one, you won the championship. How do you feel like the car has changed over then? Because it's. I mean, I know the league has changed. You got new drivers out there to battle for sure. You got drivers from past in season one that you battled that you're still battling right now. I mean, do you feel like the car's changed a good little bit? Because I feel like over time, iRacing has, gone through its changes and updates.
Yeah, for sure. I think especially now that we've made a full circle, right? We've gone from ARCA up through the ranks, trucks, Xfinity Cup, and then next gen. Now we're back at the ARCA cars, and you can kind of start to at least draw a little bit of a line to season one and say this is how things compared. I think about a lot about how the ARCA car before. I think in season one probably wasn't. I want to say wasn't in the track. If that's, I don't know. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. But just now it feels like so much more like you can feel all the bumps as iRacing and the technology have increased. You get these little nuances that you didn't have before. I think a lot of times, just more driver line would win out on those tracks in season one, and now you have to be a little bit smarter. And you're battling. I was thinking about this today. You're battling for every inch, right? Like if you're not thinking that way, you're losing inches literally probably every lap. So um, I think it's way more in the track. The tires obviously feel different. I don't know that they're necessarily better or worse than they have been in the past. I think that's just going to be something that it's constantly evolving, right? And I don't think anybody's really going to wrap their arms around that until they stick with something for a while. So that part of it, you can take or leave. But I think overall the car feels like it's more on the track. Feels like you can as they've tried to develop a car that races better in multiple grooves, right? You get a little bit more of a sketchy setup most of the time. So I think that that probably plays a hand too. I think looking back at how the ARCA car used to drive in season one, it probably drove pretty easy. I can't remember off the top of my head for sure, but I can't remember a lot of races where we're just like up to the very edge, and spinning out off every corner. And now it feels like this car, you can really drive it off the right rear if you want to. Now you have to take into account, driver craft and how you take care of tires and take care of car. But I think you have a little bit more leeway to drive it how you want to, which is the first step, I think, to getting us to where we can really see some different types of drivers step up and show out. So
Yeah, no doubt there for sure. I mean, it's kind of interesting to see how Iverson has changed over the time, and the tire, just even everything. I mean, the damage models, it's all completely different than back to season one for you guys. So it's cool to see a little bit of those differences and new drivers coming in and having their way with it with their driving style. So it's really cool to see how that's worked out. But I think one of the coolest things you already talked a little bit about Nashville this past weekend, or past Thursday. Then also the week before that, you won at Las Vegas, but we did have an update with this with the iRacing here. The new build just came out this past week, and y'all had a race on Thursday, and there was a little bit of a change up for the ARCA car. iRacing made a small little slip up, and I think this is a slip up a lot of people actually enjoyed, and iRacing has kind of went back and said, oh, this was a mistake, but we're going to keep this and also bring back the old package of the engine. So anybody out there listening, pretty much what happened is iRacing put out an update, and the ARCA car got bugged where it actually had 800 horsepower instead of the 550 horsepower package that it had previously. And I mean, that's a good bit of horsepower gain. I mean, you're looking at 250 horsepower right there additional to the rear wheels. I mean, it's definitely changed how the car's driven, and it's had so much like enjoyment out of people that Irison's actually decided to make a Gen 4 series to let that car continue racing because so many people enjoyed how it drove. I mean, how did that engine package throw y'all guys for a loop this week at Nashville? And also, like, for the future, I mean, I know that there are still discussions of what's going to be going on there, and I'm unsure maybe if that decision has been made, but what would you like to see for the future with the package? Would you like to see it go back to 550, or would you like to see it stay at this 800?
Oh man, it's interesting, right? Because you got two different kind of schools of thought. One is that the 800 package is clearly more fun, right? Like it's just a little more driver skill, a little bit. You have to be a little more careful. The race at Nashville is crazy because yeah, you were kind of on pins and needles the whole time, and I wonder. I've wondered this since we raced there whether or not it would have been that way anyway. Like that track is always a kind of treacherous. So I don't know how it would have driven differently, but it was definitely a handful. So you got kind of two schools of thought where one is the 800 package is fun. You generally do see a little more skill rise out of that situation. You have to keep the car under you. Obviously, the harder it is to drive, the longer you have to do that. It's going to be super tough. I know Nate and I were talking about how our arms hurt after that 35 lap run. We're like, man, that thing's a beast to hang on to. But the other side of it is that we've run half the season, with the 550 package. So I don't know what I prefer. I think my personal opinion is that whatever car they put us out with, the best drivers are going to win on it regardless. So I think if you're trying to make an argument one way or another, it's probably you're probably trying to hedge your bet a little bit. So I would be cool either way. I'm excited to see kind of how that car races. It's going to be interesting racing in this upcoming season to see what happens. It's just cool to have that car back, right? That car is such an iconic piece of NASCAR history. So it'll be fun to race. I wouldn't hate racing it here, but I also wouldn't hate it if they kept us with our original package because I know we kind of want to be true to what the season has, So I don't know. I'll leave those up to the guys in charge and see what they come up with, and I'll try to win either way.
Yeah, man, I understand that completely, and I think the statement you made that is the most important there with that is the guys who perform well with the 550 package, I think are still going to perform well with either one. So it's kind of universal. I think the best drivers are still going to show out when they can, and each week in and week out. So I think either way we're gonna get great racing. I know for my selfish reasons, I really want to see what this car does for like some mile and a half with the 800 package, just because I know I did a little racing with it. And man, you just got to drive this thing off the right rear now with that 800 horsepower package, and it just adds that whole different aspect to the racing. I mean, don't get me wrong, we've had some fantastic races, especially with guys comers and goers still. The tires falling off and drivers saving there a little bit coming through. I think Andrew Hess, the 5, I mean, I've said it all season, I feel like he's been one of the best drivers at just really picking up the speed as the run goes on and keeping his same continuous pace. But, I feel like, with that 800 horsepower package we saw at Nashville, I mean, like you said too, I think either way Nashville would have been difficult and tough. But I think you get to see that much more where there's more mistakes possible around each corner. And like I think that opens up the opportunities for more passing and also just more, strategic mind play with how you're going to save your tires, how you're going to use your equipment. So I totally agree with you. I think either way, it's going to be a great rest of the season, but for my selfish reasons, I know I'm a big fan of the horsepower. So if they keep that, I'll be happy. Either way, though, the 550, we're going to still have fantastic races on Thursday nights. It's always a pleasure to be up in the booth with Sam covering it. So I can't wait to see what the future holds for the rest of the season and see who can go out there and get this stuff done.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun second half. I think you kind of nailed it. Like I think the 550 kind of drives a little more off the right front, and then if we were to switch to the 800, yeah, we'd absolutely be driving more off the right rear. So you have two very different methods in which the car drives, which is probably going to really change. I mean, the drivers that are up front or the drivers that can save. Like you were saying, I agree. Andrew's been fantastic with that 550 package, but yeah, if we get the 800, it's going to be interesting to see how it changes kind of the playing field. And yeah, it's going to be fun. Either way, they're a handful. Well, I mean that Las Vegas race was kind of weird because we were all packed up in that 550 package. So I mean, if we have some more of those, I mean, anything can happen also. So it's going to be interesting. I'm excited. We'll see how the season goes. Yeah.
It definitely is looking pretty tasty for the rest of the season. I can say it's going to be fun to watch it all play out. And talking about the last half of the schedule, really, I know that you won't most likely be able to make it to all of these races, but is there any track that's left on the schedule for this season that you're kind of looking forward to and saying, hey, man, that's a track that I'm really excited to go to and see if I can go out and get myself another win?
Oh, man. Yeah, I think I'm going to be able to make a lot of these races coming up, so I'm pretty excited. The next month of races, I mean, I've got them all circled, and not necessarily because I'm good at every one of them, but just because they're going to be a ton of fun. Chicagoland, I'm from kind of Illinois-ish, so that's kind of, I view that as my home track, and always like to show up and give a little extra effort there. So I'm going to be hopefully bringing my best stuff this weekend. It'll be interesting to see like you said, what they decide for the package on that one. And then Five Flags in North Wilkesboro we got up in the next month also, and I mean, 2 more short track, kind of very similar to Nashville, that are just going to be, I mean, a ton of fun to drive. Tracks we don't go to. I think it's the first time we'll go there in the Stars and Stripes history. So, fun stuff. If you can be the inaugural winner there, I mean, that's a lot of bragging rights too. So, very excited to go to those places. And obviously Darlington. Darlington's always like one of my favorite places to go because I think it really showcases who can get around a place with a little bit more care and a little bit less margin for error. So that track's always fun. And then the playoffs, I think we go to Bristol for the championship race, which is just going to be wild. I don't know what to expect there. I'm subtly glad that I won't be a huge part of the story there. So that'd be crazy. We got some good races coming up. I'm very excited for this next month for sure.
Oh, no doubt. I it's funny because you bring up Bristol, and me and Sam the other day were sitting in the booth and we said, oh man, is there a mess up on the schedule? Is Bristol the last race? Is there a next half or next part to this schedule here? We're like, no, there's not. Okay, this is going to be very interesting when we get to Bristol and see who those final 4 are competing for a championship. So I can't wait to get there and close out the season and see who can add their names to the list of champions that have been here at Stars and Stripes so far. It's a really great group so far, and you're the leader of them, a 3-time champion. And that was pretty much the end of the questions I kind of had queued up for you, but I kind of thought of one here while I was sitting here listening to you, just enjoying listening to you talk about the seasons and how you look at racing. You know, you look at the stats. I said you had 23 wins. You know, you got 3 championships. You've been, you know, the top tier of this league for 6 seasons now. And if you look at also the rest of the stats, you see one other driver that's kind of been the driver that's kept up with you and been the one that's been on that same pace of wins, and that's Scott Rickard. 21 wins for himself. So y'all are right neck and neck for when it comes to the all-times win record here at Stars and Stripes. You know, if you had one word to describe Scott as like a competitor or as a racer, how would you do it? Because I think Scott is a very interesting driver.
Yeah, we've actually gotten a chance to race a lot together recently. We usually get together sometimes on Monday nights and race the new schedule that comes out for officials. And let's see, I try to think of the right way to put it because he's a really great guy to talk to, and he's clearly very nice and forgiving. But then when you get him on the track, I mean, you'll see a lot of times where we're inches apart, and we have a ton of fun racing each other because we know that the other one's going to take care of each other. We've had some fun finishes that way, but I think I don't want to say surprising, but just kind of the speed isn't unexpected, but the vigor in which he attacks is definitely unexpected in my opinion versus when you talk to him. So I'd say a little bit just he kind of hides in the weeds and then pops out when you least expect it. So he's fun to race with. I missed the season when he won his championship, the Truck Series, but he missed the season when I won the ARCA Series championship. So I think that kind of evens us out. And we just, ever since then, I've had some really good races. I think starting with the trucks in Chicago that one year was, oh man, I don't know if you guys even got the pleasure of broadcasting that one, but that was a heck of a finish. And he's a fun guy to race with, and everybody in here is. And the fact that I've won 3 out of 6, I guess, once this season's over, doesn't do justice to the talent that's in this league, right? Like I've got lucky and had a couple good runs to the finish, but there's so much talent that we should be really more distributed than we are because everybody in here is just fantastic. So fun guys to race with. Scott, especially always a threat, and I've had a lot of fun racing officials with him here in the last couple of years because we've gotten to know, a little bit of race strategy. He's a little bit more of a hard charger, and I'm a little bit on the slower side. So I think we've both kind of gained some tactics from the other in that regard. So that's been fun.
I love to hear that, man. I tell you, Scott is such a nice guy. Just always an interesting interview. So short, just right to the point. Tells you exactly how he felt about the race coming in, and I love that guy. He's a great racer, and like you said, with his personality, you would not think that driver is that aggressive and that willing to put it on the line. Sometimes with a personality like being that nice, you kind of don't get walked over, but you kind of get used up by a few people that are willing to, push you around a little bit. And I think he has the greatest, he has tons of speed, first of all, but the pushback is just perfect enough. It's not over the edge, and it's just enough to make it where it's great racing. And I think you two have just always had some great battles, in my opinion, watching you two.
I think you nailed it exactly. And I think his racing style makes up for what you would expect to do. Like you said, he does not allow himself to get walked over, and if you even think you're going to do that, you'll get turned before you know it. So there are some times where I look up and I'm like, oh man, that was a little close to the left rear, wasn't it? He's like, but we're always clean, and if something does happen, we both know that that's part of racing, right? So it's fun to get guys like that you can race clean with, race hard with, and always have a good time with. So.
No doubt, man. I tell you, it's always fun to watch Stars and Stripes on a Thursday night. So you folks out there tuning into this podcast, make sure you go and check them out every Thursday night at 9:20 Eastern on Freaky Fast Broadcast, and you get to see a guy like this, a 3-time champion, a 23-time winner, go out there and compete against the likes of Scott Rickard. We got Ross Tatum here coming in this past season. You got so many great drivers right in the addition. And up to, up to the point of Las Vegas, we had a different pole winner in every single race. So it just shows you the stature of the league, the speed that drivers show, and you've even had some new ones come in. You know, Juan Jimenez, he came in, he's shown some speed in his first 2 races. I'm just really excited to see how it all shakes out with season 6 and closes out, because I think, you know, whoever wins the championship is really going to deserve it this season, first off. And then also, then we go into season 7. Hopefully we'll get you back full time, and man, we'll get to see a battle for the ages, as they would say.
Yes, yeah, I agree. There's too many good guys. Not enough of them get to win often enough. I mean, there's so many good racers in here, and that find themselves up front. And most of the time, it's just one move here or there at the end of the race that decides these things, right? So, yeah, I'm excited to see how the season shakes out too, and hopefully we'll give them a run for money next season.
Definitely, man. Definitely. I tell you what, it's been a great conversation with you, Kyle. Before we close this out, is there anybody you want to send a shout out to at the league, or anybody out there tuning into the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of went over them over the race, or over the course of the conversation. I mean, shout out to Nate, obviously, for putting on the league that he does. It's a ton of fun. You can see, I mean, with as many drivers as we brought in over the years and had, I mean, just such good racing. Shout out to Derek, obviously. Wouldn't be driving with the OG G27 without him. So huge shout out to him. He's contributed there to at least the last couple wins. So yeah, and shout out to, like you said, Scott. Really fun have a ton of fun racing with him. We'll see if he gets that his second championship. He kind of looks like the guy to beat right now, in my opinion. But there's plenty of other guys out there to kind of give him a run. So yeah, shout out to those guys in terms of the league, and I'm excited to continue racing with them this year.
I'm excited to be calling it from the booth, man. You guys always put on a show. So, like I said, Thursday nights at 9:20 Eastern, folks, on Freaky Fast Broadcasting. You'll get to hear myself, Sam Dyer, have Robert Moyer Jr. running the production, and you get to see guys like Kyle McCoy here out on track. And thank you for tuning in to the second episode of the Cool Down Lap here. It's been a pleasure to talk to Kyle this week, or tonight here, and then we'll have another conversation for episode 3 with another one of the drivers here at Stars and Stripes. So thank you, Kyle, and everybody out there for tuning in. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome, man. Thank you for having me.
It's always great to hear from Zach Hall as well as Kyle McCoy. If you would like to listen to the rest of the Cool Down Lap episode 2 in its full length, go on over to Freaky Fast Broadcasting on YouTube or Spotify. That's Freaky with 2 E's. Thank you for listening. Again, can't wait for the next Freaky Fast broadcast.